Don't touch that, Allison. It's for important guests. My sister Megan's voice was a low hiss, perfectly pitched to slice through the murmur of the funeral reception without drawing general attention just for me. Her manicured hand, adorned with a diamond that could fund a black ops mission, gestured vaguely toward the silver tray of hors d'oeuvre I'd reached for. You can help the catering staff in Thekachin if you're feeling useful. I retracted my hand, my fingers curling ginto, a fist at my side. I was 41 years old, standing in the home I grew up in, and my older sister was dismissing Melly, a stray cat who had wandered in through the back door. This was her stage, and she was the star of grief, the grieving daughter, the perfect one, her husband, Richard, a man who spines him to have been replaced by a stack of investment portfolios, stood Basidia, his expression a careful mask of that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked at me, then through me, his gaze settling on a senator standing by his fireplace. Our father, General Robert Brooks, was dead. He was a man who had commanded respect in every room he'd ever entered, a titan of military intelligence who had shaped foreign policy from the shadows for 3 decades, and here, in his grand Virginia home, filled with the scent of lies and the quiet rustle of expensive suits, his legacy was being curated by the daughter knew him least. I was the disappointment, Allison Brooks, the transient one. The one with the vague low-level job at the State Department that required constant inconvenient travel to places no one wanted to visit. The one who was never home for holidays, whose life was a collection of flimsy postcards and evasive answers. To Megan, I was a failure. A perpetual wanderward never managed to anchor herself to a respectable man or a respectable care. She built a narrative of my incompetence over 2 decades, and she delivered it with the casual cruelty of absolute conviction. Go on, she whispered, her smile as sharp as broken glass. They're short on ice. I didn't move. My body was a lead weight, anchored by grief and a fury so cold it burned. I'd flown for 27 hours straight from a place I couldn't name, a place where the air tasted of sand and fear. I had traded my gear for a simple black dress in an airport bathroom, arriving just in time to watch my father's flag-draped casket be lowered into the unforgiving earth. My grief was a raw, silent thing, a hollowed-out cavern inside me. Megan's was a performance. It turned and walked away, not toward Thekachin, but toward the French doors leading to the garden. The manicured lawn rolled down toward the Bateau Theski, a muted grey that matched the chain in my chest. My father had loved this view. We'd sat on the stone bench under the old oak tree many times, him with his whiskey, me with my secrets. I never pushed. He just looked at me with those intelligent assessing eyes. Anzi, whatever the fight is, ally Makesia, it's worth the scars. He was the only one who had ever seen a glimpse of the real me, or so I had thought. The days that followed were in Megan's psychology. She was the executive of Thule, a fact she brandished like a weapon. She convened a meeting with the family lawyer, a portly man named Arthur Hemmings, who had known us since we were. The meeting was held in my father's study, a room that still smelled of old books, leather, and him. The estate is quite substantial, Arthur began, peering at us over his spectacles. Robert was a very prudent man. The house, the collection of antiquities. Megan sat opposite me, poised and serene, a black-clad vulture. Richard was by her side, a silent, imposing presence. Of course, father's primary concern was ensuring everything was managed responsibly, Megan said, her voice smooth as silk, especially given Allison's situation. I stiffened. My situation, she said as if it were a diagnosed illness. Your lack of stability, your job, whatever it is you do, keeps you moving. You have no permanent address, no clear Father worried constantly. It was a lie, a beautifully crafted one. My address was a secure post office box for a reason. My financial footing was a government salary paid into an account with layers of security. My father hadn't worried, he'd understood, but he wasn't here to say that. Therefore, Megan continued, turning her chum on Arthur. I believe the most sensible course of action, the one Thathana's father's desire for stability, is for the estate to be placed into a trust under my management. I will, of course, provide Allison with a modest annual stipend, enough for her needs, so she doesn't have to worry. She was trying to steal my inheritance, my home. She was painting me as an irresponsible child, who needed a keeper, a narrative she had been seeding for years, and now it was bearing its poisonous fruit. As depend, I asked, My voice dangerous liquid. You want to put me on an allowance. It's not an allowance, Allison. It's a safety net, Richard chimed in, his tone dripping with condescend. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. You're not equipped to manage an estate of this size. Arthur Hemmings looked uncomfortable. He glanced at a file on the desk. Robert's will does name you both as equal beneficiaries, but it grants Megan broad discretionary powers as executive. Head had expressed concerns about your lifestyle in his personal notes. Allison, I felt the floor drop out from under me. My father, he had written notes expressing concern. It couldn't be true. This was Megan's work. She must have fed him lies for years, twisting misalliance, my necessary secrecy, into a weapon against me. The betrayal wasn't just from her. It felt like it was coming from beyond the grave. I'd like to see those notes, I said. My voice called. They are private, part of the executive's discretionary file, Megan said with an air of finality. We can draw up the trust documents this week. I think that's settled. For then next week, I was a ghost in my own home. Megan and Richard moved through the house as if they already owned it, discussing renovations, pointing out which of our mother's paintings they would store in the attic. They spoke about me in the third person, even when I was in the same room. She need to clear out her old room. Of course, we can turn it into a nursery for when their grandkids visit. Do you think she'd be difficult about the car? It's technically in her name. A constant, low-grade fever. They were erasing me. Every condescending smile, every faint sigh of concern was a turn of the screw. I was trapped in orb of their lies, and my inability to reveal the truth of my life was thickage. I couldn't say. My last trip involved negotiating a hostage releasing the Sahel. I couldn't mention that's unimpressive car in my name was an nondescript vehicle I used for domestic surveillance operations. I couldn't tell them that my instability was a carefully constructed cover for a life of discipline and service they couldn't possibly comprehend. The final act was to be a grand tributator my father hosted by his old colleagues at the National War College. It was a formal affair, a room full of generals, ambassadors, and the current Secretary of Defense was scheduled to speak. Megan was ecstatic. She had secured a speaking slot for herself, a chance to eulogize her great father in front of Washington's elite. It was the crowning moment of her performance. To look presentable, Allison, she'd told me the day before, eyeing my simple black suit. It's not a backpacking trip. These are important people. Don't embarrass the family. That was her greatest fear and her greatest weapon, my potential to embarrass her. She had built her identity around being the perfect daughter of a great man. My messy and undefined, was a threat to that image. The night of the tribute, the air in the Roosevelt Hall was thick with power and prestige. Uniforms glittered with medals, and quiet conversations held the weight of national secrets. I found a seat at Atable in the back, content to be on the wall. Megan and Richard were at the head table, basking in the reflected glory of my father's legacy. When Megan walked to the podium, a hush fell over the hall. She looked magnificent in a designer gown, the very picture of dignified grief. She began bespeaking of our father's public service, his dedication, his wisdom. It was eloquent and moving. Then she turned personal. My father was a man of immense, she said, her voice catching with practiced emotion. But he also had a great capacity for worry, especially for those he loved. He built a world of stability and honor, and he wanted that for both his daughters. She paused, and her eyes found mine across the vast room. It was a look of pure theatricality. My sister Allison chose a different path, a life of wandering, of searching. He never stopped hoping she would find a safe harbor. In his final years, his greatest wish was that she would finally come home, that she would be looked after. She let the implication hang in the air, that I was the prodigal daughter, the lost sheep, the source of our great father's private, and I promised him I would. She concluded, her voice thick. I promised I would honor his legacy by providing her the stability he so desperately wanted for her. I will be her harbor. The room erupted in polite, sympathetic applause. Faces turned to me with expressions of pity. They saw exactly what Megan wanted them to see, a sad, aimless woman being graciously cared for by her benevolent older sister. Richard squeezed her hand, beaming with pride. She had done it. She had publicly cemented her narrative, painting herself as the saint and Mayast charity case. In that moment, cold fury in my chest crystallized into something hard and clear. It was time. The master of ceremonies, a retired admiral, returned to the podium. Thank you, Megan, for those heartfelt words. Our final speaker this evening is a man who knew General Brooks, not just as a colleague, but as a mentor and a friend. Please welcome the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Marcus Thorne. General Thorne, a man with 4 stars on his shoulders and a presence that could stop traffic, walked to the podium. He was a legend, a man my father had respected immensely. He adjusted the microphone, his gaze sweeping the room. Robert Brooks was my friend. He began, his voice a low rumble of authority. He was a patriot of the highest order. He had taught me that service isn't always about the battles you see on the news. The most important fights are often the no one ever hears about. He understood that true honor is found not in public accolades, but in quiet, selfless dedication to a cause greater than oneself. He paused, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the crowd until they landed directly on me. General Brooks was proud of his family. He spoke often of his daughters. He looked toward Megan and gave a polite nod. Megan, you've built a fine life, and was proud of you. But his pride in his other daughter, that was something different. It was a quiet, fierce pride rooted in a shared understanding of Theobald's of command, and the price of a confused murmur rippled through the hall. Megan's serene smile faltered, a crack appearing in her perfect facade. Richard frowned, leaning toward her to whisper something. There are aspects of Robert's legacy that, for reasons of national security, cannot be made public, General Thorne continued, his voice resonating with command. But tonight, I'm exercising my discretion to bend the rules a little, because honor is a debt that must be paid. He looked at me again, a silent order in his eyes. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, on your feet. The title hit the room like ash. Lieutenant Colonel. Heads wiveled in my direction, eyes wide with disbelief. I pushed my chair back and stood, my posture instinctively straight, my hands loosely at the shadows I had hidden in for so long evaporated under the sudden, intense spotlight. Megan's face was a mask of utter bewilderment. Her mouth had penned slightly, but no sound came out. She stared at me as if I were a stranger, an alien who had inexplicably taken her sister's form. For the past 15 years, General Thorne announced to Thessalant captive audience, Lieutenant Colonel Allison Brooks has served this nation in the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Her work has been clandestine, dangerous, and vital. She has operated in environments so hostile that most of us here only read about them in classified briefings. She has led teams, neutralized threats, and saved American lives, all while living under a cover that required her to be seen as soon impressive. He let that last word sink in. Her father did not worry about her. He protected her. His notes to his lawyer, which I have taken the liberty of declassifying this evening, were not expressions of concern. They were a legal framework designed to protect his daughter's covert identity from discovery during probate, a measure he took to ensure her safety even after he held up a single sheet of her purr. I have here a citation. It has been approved by the Secretary of Defense. I'd like to read a small part of it. He cleared his throat. For exceptionally meritorious service in a position of great responsibility, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks demonstrated unparalleled courage and ingenuity while leading a multi-agency task force in thwarting a significant terror plot against a U.S. embassy. Her actions, undertaken at great personal risk and with complete disregard for her own safety, directly prevented a catastrophic loss of life. He looked up. Allison, please come forward. My legs felt both heavy and light as I walked the long path from the back of the room to the stage. It was the longest walk of my life. I passed tables of stunned faces, uniforms turning in their seats to watch me. I didn't look at them. I looked at the stage. I looked at General Thorne, and then I allowed missed one glance at my sister, Megan O'Sashen. Her perfect composure had shattered into a million pieces. Thepity on her face had been replaced by a dawning horror, a sickening comprehension. Richard stared at me, his jaw slack. They weren't seeing the aimless wandering sister anymore. They were seeing a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. They were seeing someone with a life, a purpose, and a power they had never imagined. When I reached the stage, General Thorne gave me a small, proud smile. He held out a velvet box. Inside, resting on white satin, was the Defense Superior Service Medal. As he pinned it to the lapel of my simple black suit, the applause started. It wasn't the polite, sympathetic applause Megan had received. It was a thunderous rolling ovation, a wave of respect from people who now finally understood. I stepped to the microphone, my heart pounding. I looked out at the sea of faces, and my gaze settled on Megan one last time. My father taught me Thathaner is what you do when no one is watching, I said, my voice clear and steady. He knew who I was, he knew what I did, and that was the only approval Eva needed. This medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to him, to the legacy of quiet service he passed on to me. He was my harbor. The drive back to Thea House was silent. Megan and Richard sat in the front seat of their Lexus, rigid and speechless. I followed in my own car. When we arrived, the lawyer Arthur Hemmings was waiting on the porch, his face pale. He stepped forward as I got out of my car, ignoring Megan. "Lieutenant Colonel Brooks," he said, his voice shaky. "I received a call from General Thorne's office. I have your father's actual file. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We need to schedule a meeting immediately to properly execute his will, as your father truly intended." "Yes, we do," I said calmly. Megan finally found her voice. It was a choked, pathetic sound. I didn't know. How could I have known?" I looked at her, at the sister who had spent 2 decades belittling me, undermining me, and trying to erase me. I saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear for me, but fear for herself. Fear of what she had lost, the respect, the social standing, the inheritance she had thought was hers. "No," I said, the word falling like a stone into the quiet night. "You didn't know, but you judged anyway. You built a person of lies for me, because it made Medeo feel superior. The truth is, it wouldn't have mattered what I did for a living. If I'd been a teacher or a doctor or a CEO, you still would have found a way to tear me down. Because Miss was never the problem. It was sire weakness." I walked past her, past Arthur, and into the house that was Underway's, had been half mine. The air inside no longer felt suffocating. It felt like home. My revenge wasn't the metal or the public revelation. It was quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had finally reclaimed my own story. I was no longer the wandering daughter of family disappointment. I was Lieutenant Colonel Allison Brooks, and I was finally